My name is Steve Zeltz. I'm with United Public Workers for asking. So our first speaker is Professor George Wright, and he's going to be talking about his issue.
What I'd like to say about this episode, I think it's unfortunate and in some ways sad, because these murals done by Victor Arnautoff are totally being misinterpreted by the people that would like the murals to be removed. They claim that the murals represent an image of white supremacy, genocide, slavery. But the irony is that the intent of the artist is 180 degrees opposite of how these murals are interpreted. I think the other thing that's very important is that by
No, go ahead. Did you turn?
I think the other thing that's important, by taking these murals down, you're really erasing an incredible image of the reality of George Washington and, for that matter, American history. I'm part of I majored in history in college, and I was shaped very strongly in the early 60s and mid-60s by so-called revisionist historians who were committed to presenting history not by celebrating white supremacy, but trying to present history in an inclusive and truthful manner. What I feel very strongly is that Victor Arnautoff's murals are precursors to the efforts by the great revisionist historians of that period. Kenneth Stamp, Lerone Bennett, Eugene Genovese, etc. The next thing I'd like to say, the tragedy of all of this is I think the onus of responsibility sits on the hands of the school board itself, that they've allowed this development to fester and to emerge, and it should have been their responsibility of finding a way to educate the students at George Washington High School, the working people in this community, and for that matter, the entire region, about the real intent and meanings of these murals. And it's unfortunate that people who'd like it to be removed have not been privy to that kind of education. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Jack Hammond. Jack is a former business agent and
I'm an African American, man.
And leader of the ILWU Local 10 in San Francisco. So welcome,
needs to be heard over your press conferences within their own prayer circle. Whose history do you think that you're protecting?
Yeah. Anyway, my name is Jack Hammond, and in the interest of freedom of speech, I would like to impart a little bit of wisdom to some of the people that aren't familiar with the history of San Francisco. In 1934, there was a general strike in San Francisco led by longshoremen and seamen against the repressive, reactionary businesses in San Francisco.
You're coming to our place, okay?
Your place is a public space. People were having there's no reason to enter.
Union hiring hole in the midst of the Depression. In the midst of the Depression, this general strike took place. At the same time that the general strike was going on in San Francisco, there were murals by Diego Rivera.
You know what you're doing? You're intimidating this prayer circle.
That were being destroyed by right-wing reactionaries. They called on Rockefeller to remove the murals of Diego Rivera, destroy them, and that's exactly what happened. They destroyed the murals of Diego Rivera. Why? Because there were leaders of the Russian Revolution, Lenin and Trotsky.
Having a prayer circle, the only reason the microphone is on is to drown out the voices of the people down there.
Needs to be removed, and Rockefeller removed those murals. That's exactly what's happening today in San Francisco. There's an attempt to remove the murals of Victor Arnautoff. Victor Arnautoff and his colleague Reparations have murals up at the Rincon Annex that was done during the WPA period. These are murals opposed to racism, opposed to imperialism, opposed to the way working people were trying to organize back in the 19th century. And when they were produced during the McCarthy period, right-wing forces in San Francisco tried to have them removed. In fact, the Republican Party came out very strongly to remove the murals in Rincon Annex altogether. But because of the strength of the labor movement and progressive people in San Francisco, those murals are still up today. Just like the murals by Refrigier at Rincon Annex, the murals at George Washington High School and other places around the Bay Area need to stay up. Students need to learn about the history of America. George Washington was a slave owner. That's what the murals portray. George Washington was directing pioneers to head west over the bodies of dead Indians, dead Native Americans. That's what the pictures show. They do not justify it. It's a criticism of that policy. In the background, you see black slaves bending over working in the fields. He was adamantly opposed to slavery. And back in the 1940s, during the period of reaction, there was an attempt to remove Arnautoff's murals. They did not succeed, and they should not succeed today. Now, granted, I think some of these young people are outraged about racism, and that's a good thing. But it's got to be directed against the right targets. Arnautoff was not a racist, quite the opposite. He was an anti-racist. I don't believe what they're doing is wrong. I think they're targeting the wrong people. I don't defend these statues staying up around the country. They should be taken down. They're signs of racism. It's justifying the Confederacy. Bring down the statues. Bring down the Confederate flag. But leave up images of art that teach our history of the fight against that racism, the fight against imperialism, the fight against slavery. John Brown would have been standing here defending those murals. So would Paul Robeson. These students have to understand that kind of history, and that's why we're here today to speak to the school board to let them know this is freedom of expression, it's a right, it's something that people fought for, and we mean to make sure that Arnautoff's murals, like Refrigieres at the Rincon Annex, stay up. They represent our history from a progressive point of view, not a reactionary point of view.
Thank you, Jack. Now, one of the things that happened at last week's board meeting is, in discussing and interviewing some of the supporters of those who want to remove the murals, is they said there was no information up at the murals. Now, whose responsibility is that? The school board and superintendent could have put up information about these murals. In fact, what we are saying is that there should be a Native American Cultural History Center at George Washington High that has tours of the mural. And that this tours could be a requirement of every student in the city and county of San Francisco and San Francisco Unified School District. That would change the understanding of these murals, and it would strengthen the fight against racism and also the attacks on the truth about the history of this country. So our next speaker is going to be Harvey Smith, who's been an activist in the fight to protect the murals WPA project. Welcome, Harvey.
Thank you, Steve. I'd just like to point out that there are clearly solutions to this crisis. First of all, I think Steve just mentioned it, interpretation. School board, the school itself, the superintendent could have developed interpretation of those murals. Because obviously people are looking at them and really not seeing what is there. Second, and I know that's possible, as I mentioned at the board meeting last week, I developed in collaboration with the Art Commission, new signage for the Coit Tower murals, so you can interpret art. Because a lot of times there's things within a painting, within a mural, that may not be obvious to the casual viewer. Also, that that in terms of developing curriculum, which was mentioned by the people that are detractors of the murals, that's entirely possible. I worked as an Oakland teacher. We had a course for high school students called Multicultural Studies. It focused on Japanese American internment, the Black Panthers, and the native occupation of Alcatraz. So this is the kind of curriculum that should be in the schools. And if we look at what Arnautoff did, he was way ahead of his time. When these murals were painted over 80 years ago, he was the one that put on the wall George Washington holding slaves, George Washington pointing westward towards Native genocide. So the fact is that we're still trying to catch up with Arnautoff at this point. Modern textbooks, maybe a few, but I think they're few and far between, actually tell the real story. So Arnautoff led the way. We should pick up where he left off. And anything else we can do, whether it's a Native American Cultural Center, a Black Cultural Center, the amount of money that the school board will spend on covering the murals is frankly obscene, when it could be spent and put to better educational uses. And I think the taxpayers of San Francisco, when they hear about the true cost of covering up these murals, I think some of these school board members may not be around come the next election. So there are a lot of issues here, but I think the bottom line is that public art of this kind should not be obliterated. This is, in these current times, we need to have more of this kind of art that explains history and motivates people to discuss and debate history. So we don't want to cover it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. And one of the issues and problems is the lack of education about our history, the history of working people in this country. That's what Arnautoff was putting his career on the line to express. These murals are very controversial because they show the true history of the United States. They show that George Washington was a slaveholder. They showed the development of Western imperialism and capitalism, which was the genocide of the Native American people. That's what happened, including in California, where there was genocide. So why don't we use these murals as a basis of education of every student and the community in San Francisco? That's what we are saying as far as the defense of the murals. And when does it end? I mean, this mural's at George Washington High. Next we could be at the Rincon Annex calling for the removal of those murals because they show the exploitation of Chinese workers in San Francisco. They show the brutality of the capitalists in San Francisco and racists. So our next speaker is going to be Doug Minkler. Doug is an artist. Can you say a few words? You don't have anything? Okay. Well, we're also going to invite Joel Britton. Do you want to speak?
Hi, I'm Joel Britton from the Socialist Workers' Party. I'm actually running for mayor of San Francisco. And as I said last week, the charge that the mural is a glorification of slavery and the genocide of Native Americans is false. It's just not true. Absolutely false that it glorifies slavery and genocide, as these other speakers have pointed out. I just want to underline one point, that censorship, like what the proponents of painting over the mural are, the precedent that's gonna, if they succeed, that precedent will come down hardest on the working class, including African American, Latino, Native American, and Asian American working people. Censorship lends a hand to those who would target the strongest fighters for our class and artists who are our allies. These are the stakes in preventing the destruction or covering up of the George Washington mural. And just to And I agree with the point about the San Francisco general strike. This mural was painted 2 years after a series of 3 historic strikes in this country. The one here, led by the Longshore Union, the one in Minneapolis, which was a Teamster fight, and the one in Toledo, which was auto parts workers. These 3 strikes were very deep going, and they posed the question that working people are capable of not only fighting for a union, but strong enough. We're the kind of power that can be the class that runs the country. We don't need a handful of billionaires to run the country. So I think it's very important, this fight to save the mural. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One of the points that has also been made is the racism in the city and county of San Francisco school district. Because there's ethnic cleansing in the San Francisco Unified School District. There's a program called PAR, Peer Assisted Review. And that program has been used to discipline African American teachers, Latino teachers, and senior teachers to kick them out of the district illegally. They've discriminated against these. And teacher Margaret Reyes was fired because she would not go in the PAR program. What is the PAR program? The PAR program was supposedly set up to improve the education competence of the teachers. That's how it was set up. In reality, it's become a disciplinary process between the management and the union to get rid of teachers, to bring in younger teachers, and to get rid of African American teachers. That is part of the racism that we're discussing that they're not addressing here at the school board. So we feel that the education that has to take place in the San Francisco Unified School District also has to do with not just a mural, which they argue is racist, but actually what is happening with the teachers and the students. Our next speaker is Bob Cherney, who is author of a book on Victor Arnautoff. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Steve. I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but one of the things that I think it's important to think about is the way in which there's been a false analogy drawn between the Arnautoff murals at George Washington High School and the removal of the Confederate statues. I don't know, do we want to go on? Are you picking this up? Okay. At the time that the Confederate statues were such a source of controversy, the American Historical Association Executive Board passed a resolution in which it pointed out that the history of those statues was very clear, that they were created to commemorate the Confederacy, to celebrate the Confederacy, to celebrate white supremacy, because at that time the South was in the process of disenfranchising and segregating all African Americans, and that therefore removing those statues was based on the intent of the people who had created them. By contrast, the intent of the artist of the George Washington murals was not to celebrate white supremacy or slavery, but instead to criticize those things. Arnautoff called himself a social realist, which meant in his mind that he should depict society in a realistic way. He should criticize those aspects of American society and American history that were deserving of criticism. So when he depicted African Americans as being enslaved, that was a criticism of George Washington. It was a recognition of the contradiction that George Washington was both a very important statesman and also an owner of people as chattel. When Arnautoff depicted a martyred Indian warrior, he was not celebrating that, he was criticizing that. He was criticizing the fact that the settlement of the West represented what he said at the time, and I quote, the westward march of the white race. Go ahead. He said that
Hello? Did you, yeah? Hello?
So artwork or statues that were intentional representatives of white supremacy and taking down artworks that were, in fact, a criticism of it.
I'll be reading a combination of two, excuse me? This first letter is from Gordon Knotts, president of the San Francisco Art Institute. The destruction of art never advances dialogue and should never be misconstrued as a message of revoking facts of human history. I hear the deep hurt of students and others faced with painful imagery. Artists can help us see our world in powerful and even disturbing ways. This second letter is from the California College of the Arts. This is the president, Stephen Beal. The injustices the murals invoke are difficult to look at and discuss and reckon with. This is exactly where their greatest value lies, within the context of a high school, where students are learning to exercise the powers of critical assessment and discourse, a space that respects each student's history. To sum it up, as the George Washington Alumni Board member, we know it is hard to look at, but we really believe in education and history, and that's why we'd like to keep the murals up. Thank you. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Just say your scene. Take it.
I can't just go on this.
We just got news today that Thomas Campbell, director of the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, has written thus to us: while I respect the concerns of the protesters and understand the problematic issues at play, I do not believe that San Francisco will be well served by the destruction of the mural series. The piece was originally intended to provoke thoughtful discussion around these exact issues, and while intent does not in a way impact, the piece could have incredible value as a teaching tool for further generations. Please listen to this. I would be happy to volunteer our staff to assist in the next steps following Tuesday's meeting. Last week, a diverse group presented a reasoned defense for George Washington High School's murals. A motion won the day. I am shocked that the board is considering squandering public funds to cover over the murals that express exactly the same point of view as their critics. The murals take some understanding of history to grasp, but I'm further shocked that the board appears to lack the courage to rise to the occasion. Indeed, I wonder how many of you have actually seen the murals. Please consider the sheer cost of the proposed solution. Dollars that could be invested in tutoring, I have already gotten the other people have seen it their time, could be invested in tutoring, teacher salaries, or a Native American resource center. My mission neighbors are outraged that you are planning to cover over work by a disciple of Diego Rivera, the grandfather.
Well, I thought you said one person can spend 30 minutes or, 1 minute.
Yeah, we can probably have next speaker, please.
Thank you for the time. Every country has skeletons in their closet. I come from a country, just like United States, that has genocide in its past. I come from Turkey, where Armenian genocide has happened, and millions and millions of people have been decimated. But in Turkey today, you cannot even say the word genocide. It is banned. Anything that has to do with the Armenians is banned. Their art is banned. Their culture is banned. Anything, even say here, when I'm saying the word genocide, if I was in Turkey, I would get 20 years. Because I'm outside the country, I'm gonna get 35 years of prison for saying this. This is where it goes. Once the genocidal people start censoring the art that depicts the history, depicts the genocide, depicts the killing of the people, and it goes down from there. Nothing you can do.
The murals, the Arnautoff murals, represent social history. They provide a inclusive and truthful story of American history. They should not be removed Removing them represents censorship as well as a reactionary moment in time. What I do recommend is that the school board establishes some kind of multimedia display in the entrance of George Washington High School that indicates the complexity and contradictions of George Washington, the extraordinary history of Victor Arnautoff, as well as a discussion about the role of the WPA in the 1930s to try to provide an accurate environment for people in this country. Thank you.
And before you get started, I'm just going to read the rest of the names I have here. Also, when people begin speaking, just please state your name for the record, as I'm trying to manage the cards that I have up here. So the remaining names that I have here are, looks like last name Davis. I think it's James Davis. It's not clear. Harvey Smith, Carol Gaddis, Jean Amos, Carol Denini, Steve Zetter, Joel Brenton, Camille Story, Robert Bailey, and Bo Yap Jr.
My name was eliminated.
Continue. Go ahead, sir.
My name's Ben Wood. I would like to have 10 seconds of silence to recognize the silence, what silencing of this mural sounds like. I'm a projection artist based here in San Francisco. I'm a proud immigrant, citizen, and an advocate of endangered murals. During the past 15 years, I have advocated for California's oldest colonial mural, painted by Ramaytush Aloni artisans in 1791, and concealed since 1796 behind the wooden altar here in San Francisco at Mission Dolores. This board has made a deliberate effort not to consider alternatives to censoring the mural. I see affirming opportunities to animate and give context to the mural, and I propose a feasible, dynamic, and inexpensive solution: a projected video artwork permanently projected onto the mural itself that will bring diverse perspectives to the mural without adversely affecting its historic fabric. Figures and subject in the mural could literally... I didn't... I've got a timer. It's on 50 seconds left. I've got a timer that says 50 seconds left. I started at 2 minutes, and I'm timing it myself.
Finish it. Yes.
The timer is continuing to go, so if you want to continue to speak, you'll be taken from other people behind you. Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Jack.
Turn the press the button.
Oh. My name is Jack Hammond. I'm a retired member of the Longshore Union, ILWU. I want to address my remarks to the students because I want to use this as a teaching moment, because apparently the school board hasn't done their job to teach the students what these murals are about. In 1934, there was a general strike in this town. Now, I don't know if the students are aware of that, but what provoked the general strike was our union and Siemens unions were striking to have a union hiring hall for jobs. And the police killed 2 strikers. That provoked a general strike that lasted for 3 days. And it changed the whole atmosphere in the city of San Francisco. It's what made San Francisco a union town. It was really a very violent clash because the police and the National Guard were called out. At the same time in 1934...
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm Michelle Mouton. I'm scared. But I've been an activist in the city and for people around the world my whole entire life, and I'm 66. It's a very complex issue, the issue of the mural, whether it stays or leaves and what the images mean, because we're under attack by our president and by the climate in the world today is one which makes you question everything. So the tendency to revise what actually is right out there. And the sides that you get on are pretty clear. But I think it's because of all that it's very complicated. And I feel like there's several measures that haven't been exhausted, like contextualizing the mural, which I think some people have attempted to describe today, when it was made, what its intent was, and how it exists today, actually countering a lot of the things that people are speaking up for now. And finally, I think that, whoa, okay, bye.
Just as a reminder, we have 30 minutes total allotted. Each speaker has 1 minute. And please state your name for the record.
Push the button. Push the button.
My name is Robert Cherney. I want to remind you all that there are 13 separate murals. Your agenda item speaks of the mural. There are 13 separate murals that make up the life of Washington. They are all historic resources. They all fall under CEQA. If you are going to make changes to any of them, or all of them, you will be, and by covering them with a solid panel, you'll be removing them as historic resources. You need to file an environmental impact report if you are going to do this, and it should include a discussion of the alternatives that you have considered and why you have rejected each of the alternatives. I've not seen anything to suggest that you have done any of that work, so I think it's premature to be voting on anything.
My name is Toby Reese from the World Socialist website. I strongly oppose any removal or painting over of the murals. It has nothing to do with social progress or righting past wrongs. The murals have important artistic and historic value. Arnautoff was a left-wing artist who offered a critical view of American history. If people don't want to see unpleasant or potentially offensive images, they should just stop studying history altogether. Despite the justifications that have been presented, this is no better than book burning or other reactionary forms of repression and censorship. Ultimately, it is aimed at blocking the population from understanding American society's contradictory social development, something which has been and continues to be nuanced and complex. The past must be studied, it must be critically thought about, and it must be understood in order to improve the present. Ignorance never helped anyone. We can't erase history. And I encourage people who are interested in speaking to workers around the world and youth to contact me if you'd like to have your voice heard.
Hi, my name is Barry Carter. I'm a third generation in San Francisco. It's an honor to speak for the board. I just would like to question the process with which the board established the Reflection and Action Committee. I think that process needs to be revisited. These murals certainly do not endorse white supremacy, and as far as the offensiveness of violent images, I think everything from Pokemon to every television show and movie that is out now should be censored if that is the criteria for removing these. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rhea Durbin Carter, and I am a parent of a recent WASH grad. I'm also a painting conservator at SF MoMA, and I've worked at the DeYoung Museum as well over the years. I've been a painting conservator for over 30 years now. And as a conservator, my training is to preserve art for future generations, and certainly not destroy it. The fact that this is even being contemplated just is, it sickens me. The WPA I've restored another WPA painting at SF MoMA that's on display in the permanent collection on the second floor. This is a very significant part of our history, and the fact that artists were allowed and respected enough to create these artworks.
My name is Jeff Powers. I'm a worker, a railroader. I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. What we're talking about tonight is important and it's dangerous. The first thing we have to establish is that these murals are not racist, and they don't glorify racism. They're an artist's interpretation of a society which is racist, and it's important for us to study that and to look at these murals. Now, you don't have to like the murals. That's not necessary. But you have no right to take them down. That's censorship, which we all should be opposed to. Now, this is a slippery slope. If you censor these murals, where do we stop? There are other murals in the city which could easily be censored. And there are other things that can be censored. You have no right to censor these murals. Now, what the board has to do here is to stand with the majority and oppose the censorship of the murals, oppose to painting them over. Don't take them down.
My name is Dean Ferguson. I'm the father of... press the button. Right here? Got it. My name is Dean Ferguson. I'm the father of two recent graduates of Washington High School, which incidentally is one of the best schools in the country. I'm calling, or I should say, speaking with regard to Victor Arnautoff, who, of course, is the painter of these murals. Arnautoff belonged to the Communist Party, a party whose members and supporters included Paul Robeson, Richard Wright, and Louise Thomas Patterson, as well as Claude McKay, all militant champions of the Black Liberation Movement, a party that defended Angelo Herndon, the Scottsboro Boys, and other black men wrongly accused of capital crimes. That he would have painted murals celebrating the legacy of slavery and racial oppression is ludicrous. He was a committed communist, not an apologist for crimes against people of color. There is, as evidence of his commitment to anti-racism, a panel that very few people, all right, we got it. Thank you very much. Okay.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. No, it's on. It's on here. Go ahead.
My name is Carol Gaddis. I was an art teacher at Washington High School for many years. I always took my students to view and discuss the murals so they could know about the WPA. Do any of you kids know about the WPA? The Depression. We talked about the Depression, the contributions of artists who created these murals, an amazing development of our young nation, as well as the mistakes we made along the way. Our follow-up discussions include the inhumanity of slavery and the cruel abuse of Native Americans. It's all there in the murals. Our high points and our low points. It would be unconscionable to destroy or cover up the Washington murals for all the points I have stated above. These valuable murals are companions of the murals in Coit Tower, the Beach Chalet, and many other public buildings in San Francisco and the cities throughout our country.
I'm James Davis. I'm James Davis. I'm an alumnus of George Washington High School and a lifelong citizen of San Francisco. And frankly, I'm embarrassed to say that I'm a San Francisco listening to this potential censorship. I was thinking of when I went to the Legion of Honor and saw the Holocaust Memorial, and I find that very distressing and difficult to deal with. But to take that down, to erase the Holocausts that have occurred, a much more mature response would be what Dr. Crumpler did in the 1970s when there was a similar protest and the African American community gathered together and painted another mural which stands in Washington High School as a counterpoint to this present mural. So I'd just like to remind you that I voted for most of you in the last election. Please show me that I did not make a mistake. I live in San Francisco and I vote, and I will do my best to make sure that this discussion is made public to all the San Franciscans that you really are oppressing free speech.
Good evening, my name is Robert Tamaka Bailey. I just wanted to make one comment first. I didn't appreciate being called a white supremacist because I'm for keeping those murals up. I'm speaking as an elder of the First Nation peoples of Oklahoma. As I said last week, those murals are our visual history that genocide was there. It shows it in those murals. To take those down, you're taking a visual record away. And if you're thinking that to take those down based on they're showing white supremacy, it's just hard for me to fathom that, especially when I'm a First Nation people too. And I hear where these activists are coming from. I get angry when I see that, but I don't get offended, because I get angry when I hear about what happened to my mom on boarding schools when she spoke her language. It helps to take me in a direction to strategize how we can overcome that.
My name is Harvey Smith. I want to underscore a point I made last week, and that's that it's totally possible to put these murals in context. I did interpretive signage at Coit Tower. You can do it here too. I also want to speak as a former Oakland teacher. When I was an Oakland teacher, I taught a class called Multicultural Studies. There were 4 units. We looked at the Japanese American internment, the Black Panther Party, the native occupation of Alcatraz, and the United Farm Workers. So along with other teachers, we did reach students, and we did have deep discussions about these issues. We took a look back. And I don't know what's going on here in San Francisco. It doesn't seem to be happening here. Also, I've done tours of New Deal murals all over the city. And I stood in front of murals with people, and we've had very deep discussions about what may be in the murals or not in the murals. So these murals always become talking points, a beginning point. Thank you.
My name is Carol Denny, and I'm an artist who has experienced censorship. When I first wrote to you, I offered to buy any one of you or all of you a copy of this book about Victor Arnautoff and the politics of art. It's really worth reading, especially in this moment, and I just want to really encourage you not to make a decision tonight, but to wait until you've had a chance to learn more thoroughly about the life of an artist who went out of his way to illustrate genocide, racism, and make sure his work was consonant with social justice. Thank you.
My name is Steve Zeltzer with the United Public Workers for Action. I hold this board and the superintendent, Dr. Matthews, responsible for this mess.
1 second, sir. Ms. Costco, can you start the timer, please?
Okay, I hold this board and the superintendent Matthews, Dr. Matthews, responsible for this mess, because why wasn't there any information about the murals for the students that came to this? Just watching it facing off without understanding that? You were responsible for letting the students know what this mural represents. You didn't do that. In fact, you set up a rigged committee without any alternatives to provide information about this mural. It's a rigged committee that allows you to now say you're going to vote to cover these murals, to censor them, to destroy them. And frankly, that's going to cost millions of dollars, because people are going to sue, and we're going to end up spending millions of dollars defending the taking down of these murals. Who's responsible for that? The money should be spent on teachers. It should be spent on building a Native American cultural history center at the school that provides guides. And every student
in San Francisco Unified School District should be required to go to the murals to get an education about this history, this great art that shows the real history of the United States. That's what we should be doing.
Hello? Okay. Joel Britton, Socialist Workers' Party. I'm opposed to censoring the mural. The board should vote to not paint it over, cover it up, or anything else. Leave it be. This anti-racist, anti-genocide mural could not have been painted if it hadn't been for the working class upsurge of those times. The San Francisco General Strike, the Minneapolis Teamster strikes of 1934, paved the way for the industrial unions in this country. It was a tremendous development. It made it possible for Victor Arnautoff to paint this historic fresco. Don't paint it over, don't cover it up.
Next speaker, please. We have about 10 minutes remaining.
Jean Amos. Got it? Okay. My name is Jean Amos. I'm just a citizen of San Francisco. This reminds me of kind of a cliche for people my age when Mark Twain, they debated whether Mark Twain should be...
Excuse me. My name is Leo Zakharov, and my name wasn't called.
Yeah.
You want to start the
Is
time?
that
Go
okay?
ahead.
Your name wasn't up there, but go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a graduate from George Washington High School, class of 1961. There's a craze going around the country. It's spreading like wildfire across America to tear down statues, monuments, and religious artifacts. Where did our country go wrong? We must preserve history so we as a society do not repeat it again. The only thing I have to say is this. If San Francisco School Board decides to destroy the murals, why don't you also rename George Washington? He was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. Why don't you rename George Washington to Pelosi High School? I'm sure Nancy will be thrilled to have her name on a school. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cousin. Victor Arnautoff was he had the guts enough to paint something against George Washington at the George Washington School. The reason is that he really wanted students to know not the rosy picture of George Washington's history, but reality, real history of the U.S. American government. And that's why he wanted to do it with that period. And this founding father of the George Washington, I don't know what the people think of it, but reality is not that rosy. That's what he really wanted students to learn. But
High School Alumni Association, and we stand with Dewey Crumpler, Matt Gonzalez, in preserving the priceless murals at George Washington High School. I asked you last week to consider delaying this vote. It could be a death sentence if you decide to do what you're talking about. And I just want to make sure before you do anything that you all take a technical tour of the murals by WPA, PWA, art experts. That I recommend the videos that I was not allowed to show last week, that you review those of Dewey Crumpler and Robert Tamaka Bailey, and the audio show that Dewey Crumpler participated in yesterday. I ask you to follow whatever you decide to do, I ask you to follow all the CEQA protocols, CAPA protocols, and BEGA protocols. Thank you.
And this will be our last speaker on that.
Thank you. My name is Lydia Zabiruja, and after being accused of being a white supremacist, I'm here to fight for the humanity of everybody that spoke before me and is in support of those murals staying up. I hope for a better world that has collaboration, compromise. A world that looks to honor all cultures and all peoples, not by destroying them. Last week, I talked about my father, who was a civilian survivor of a forced labor camp during World War II and the Nazis. He came here to give me a better life. I was born here, I'm a native. But the symbol that stayed with him is that Nazism. And I cannot say anything other than this experience is evoking such deep pain. And I'm losing hope for this country that we can come together. Honor all people. Serce обливается кровью. In Russian, it means my heart is essentially smothering in its own blood. I ask you, collaborate, compromise, seek a solution that honors all people. Thank you.
Chief Kamalanath.
Commissioners, our recommended action tonight is to authorize staff to develop a project for the purposes of CEQA review that removes from public view the Arnautoff mural at George Washington High School using solid panels or equivalent material.
Okay, any comments from the board or the superintendent? Vice President Sanchez.
Thank you. I'd like to amend the proposal to say this. The board authorizes staff to develop a project for the purposes of CEQA review that removes from public view the Arnautoff mural at George Washington High School by painting over the mural. Or if in the judgment of staff, painting over the mural will result in an undue delay, staff shall develop a project that removes the mural from public view using solid panels or equivalent material. So I'm moving that be essentially a substitute motion.
Okay, is there a second? Any discussion on the proposed amendment? Superintendent Matthews.
I would just like Chief Kamalanath to, because that's one of the areas that we looked at previously, so I just at least wanted that, you to have staff's comment on that as you're considering whether to add that amendment.
Thank you, Superintendent. So, respectfully, Commissioners, the presentation that I shared at the Committee of the Whole on the 18th and the recommended action, the original that was shared tonight, does represent at this point staff's analysis and best recommendation informed by two goals. One is to permanently remove the murals from public view, and two, to do so in the fastest and most cost-effective way possible. So I don't think that this preliminary analysis has been completed and the recommendation has been made, and it seems unlikely to shift based on time, another week or two.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? So there's a proposed amendment, and we're going to vote to pass the amendment or not.
I want to talk to legal counsel. Would that be amending the original motion?
That's how I hear the Commissioner's motion.
Okay, so just.
I have a question. I've spoken a lot on this topic. I'm really interested in hearing from other commissioners who haven't spoken about their feelings on this, because I do think that it's important that we all talk about it, and I would like to hear from other folks.
Just on the proposed amendment, once we do, I won't be supporting it. I'm going to support the staff's recommendation to cover the mural. So just that's where I stand on the item right now. Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
Don, if you can talk with us, explain to us what the environmental impact report process looks like.
Certainly, Commissioner. So I'm going to give a 30-second digest version of a complex regulatory process, but fundamentally, EIR stands for Environmental Impact Report, and it has two purposes: to kind of want to analyze findings and impacts and flag those for the public to inform policymakers so that they can make good decisions that impact the physical environment, and two, also to evaluate alternatives in light of a project goal. So to really look at several different ways that you can accomplish a goal while then evaluating the impacts to the environment associated with each one of those alternatives. So your first step is we would hire consultants to help us prepare the EIR report. We would identify project goals and with board support that are consistent with board direction. And then we would craft both a series of alternatives and begin to evaluate those alternatives in terms of their impacts, in this case particularly to historic resources. You conduct studies, research, analysis, you prepare a draft report, you actually, before that, you notify the public that you're going to pursue an EIR to analyze the project. You prepare your draft report. You then have to solicit and receive public comment on your analysis in the EIR, and you have to respond to each and every public comment that is delivered. It has to be delivered in written form, and then you respond to each one of those comments based on their, to the extent that those comments indicate a critique or validation of the EIR's analysis. You finalize your draft report into a final EIR that then the Board of Education would have to certify. And in that certification process, which the certification focuses on basically saying that the EIR's analysis was thorough and correct. But then if you wanted to adopt an option to accomplish, one of the alternatives to accomplish your project goal that was determined to have significant and unavoidable impacts, you have to also adopt something called a statement of overriding consideration that says we have a specific project goal, this alternative or this particular option will allow us to achieve that project goal in ways that other options don't. And so because of that, we're going to override the considerations of the impacts to the environment and proceed with the preferred alternative. So it's a complex process. I've done a few of them, a few notable ones, and I have never been able to complete an EIR in less than a year. And that's just to, again, get the report ready for public consumption. And then there's also a series of appeal processes that are also available to the public after the board makes its certification finding.
Thank you for going through that process and timeline. I just want to state that how I appreciate the work and testimonies that have been provided for many weeks and months and years and decades of it. I want to express that I absolutely support having the murals out of sight so it does not continue to cause the trauma for our students. And so I will also be supporting the recommendation from the staff this evening.
I have a statement here from Commissioner Norton. She asked me to read it, so bear with me. I'm sorry that I had a long-planned family trip that has prevented me from being present at tonight's meeting. I want to thank everyone who is engaged in this very emotional issue on both sides. I read all the comments and thought deeply about my position on this issue. If the murals were in a museum rather than a school, I don't believe this issue would have surfaced at all. This is why I asked whether it was possible to move them to another location where they could be preserved and also maintained for people who chose to see them. Unfortunately, at this time, moving the murals is not possible without destroying them. A school is a place that students don't necessarily choose to go. They have to go there every day to access an education. We have said many times that our schools need to be places where students feel safe and supported. In general, George Washington is such a place. My own daughters have very positive experiences there. I've particularly appreciated the letters from students telling us how they feel about the murals, particularly thanks to GWHS faculty member Thomas Reddy, who had all of his U.S. history teachers write us with their positions. Those opinions and experiences vary, but I have been particularly guided by the students who told us they felt the murals were dehumanizing and traumatizing.
Students should not be forced to view images at schools that make them feel that way. As an aside, kids sometimes say insensitive things, but "meet you at the dead Indian" is particularly offensive. However, I could not bring myself to support painting over and permanently destroying artwork. I think a permanent cover should be erected. That is a solution I hope the board will opt for this evening. However, whatever is decided, the public should know that the board has thought deeply on this issue and considered many perspectives. Thank you to my colleagues for considering mine. Commissioner Collins, Commissioner Maliga.
Thank you, everyone, for coming here tonight. From all communities to support, this issue. I have a lot of respect for everyone who spoke tonight from both sides, and my responsibility as a board member is to make sure that, as a therapist and a social worker, is that the kids are, mentally and emotionally feeling safe at their schools today. I'm Samoan, I'm from an indigenous community, and I understand how these things could be very offensive to my people. If it was Samoans up there, we would be very hurt. And, I was here before when the community came up, and, these are people's lives. These are what people have to go through every single day. I had to explain to my son today, you are a Samoan and a Mexican young man in San Francisco. Can't just be walking around thinking that you're not. So it was hard for me to have this conversation with him around racism. It broke my heart. He said, "Daddy, but I didn't do anything." I was like, "Exactly, but..." So these conversations that I have as a person of color with my kids, it's very real. And so, if we got to go to court, then we have to go to court, But I don't want to go to court. I don't think we need to go to court, But if it comes down to it, then that's what we have to do, right? And so I'm behind the community that would like to, support safe spaces, right? And so where I stand tonight is I would like for these murals to be painted down.
Our healing in our hands, yes, paint it down.
I just want to mention, I wanted to comment on this conversation around litigation, because when people say, it's not expensive, the reason that it's expensive is because people are saying they're going to sue in order to keep them up. And so I just want to be clear. And there's also cost to just, anything that we do in the district. It has to go through a certain process. It takes time. But I want to be really clear that people are choosing to sue, and they're raising money to sue, and they're also showing up here. And I do find it very disheartening. I watched a video of last year, January 23rd, 2018. You should look it up. The Native American PAC came and they presented. Let's just say the room was not this full, okay? It was considerably less full. And so when I think about, who's really showing up to support Native American communities, who really cares about their history being represented properly, all of you guys should be there. You should be at, when the Ali team shows up and they say, we want to have representation in our schools. We want to have Black history in our schools. Like, those meetings are not this full either. And so it just feels really disingenuous when people say that they care about history and they care about art. We had another meeting last week. We were talking about getting art into all of our schools, and we're going to be talking about that later on. When we talk about mental health, that's another thing we're going to be talking about. And yet right now we're spending a lot of time talking about people's need to defend the life of Washington Murals as if it was a person. And when I see the people who spoke tonight, I see
I see people who went to Washington and have strong memories of Washington, some of which are disturbing. People have said, oh, you know, we used to meet under the dead Indian, as if that's a reason that I should keep it. You know, I'm thinking that's not a good thing, because it is normalizing violence. And I do want to be very clear for folks, history is important. A long time ago, not too long ago, Native Americans have consistently been depicted as a vanishing race, right? That is a specific stereotype assigned to Native American community. The poem 10 Little Indians is a nursery rhyme that was used to teach number sense to little children. It's about each Native American dying off until there were none. Okay, that's a history that Native American communities hold, and they know that. So it's different than seeing just anybody lying there, right? A Native American that is dead on a wall and having people walk over him, that has cultural significance, and that history is not something, that painful history is not something that needs to be consistently in children's faces. And then just, you know, violence in general, my kids cannot believe that kind of violent imagery is on their walls. And they keep asking me, like, you can't come to shirts. I mean, I think if I put a dead Indian, you know, mural on my shirt, as a kid, they'd tell me to leave and take it off. So I don't understand why it's allowed on a mural. And so I guess my question is I mean, we're not supposed to have disruptive environments, right? In our school, kids can't come to school with gun earrings. They can't have pot paraphernalia. And I just wanted to know from legal, you know, I mean, what are our handbook rules on things that, you know, just even in a classroom, what can we put up on the walls, and what kind of imagery is considered acceptable?
Right. Well, I think as many of the speakers and as many of the commissioners have pointed out, for years this has been depicted as historical depiction and not as violence. So yes, we would not typically have teachers depicting violent scenes on the walls.
So I guess I just also want to point out that people keep saying that this is art, and I can say, yes, it might be art, and it can also be racist. So, it can be both, and I want us to hold that, and I also want us to hold that the people who created the art may not have intended it to be harmful, but that doesn't mean that it isn't harmful, right? And so, anyway, I want to ensure that children don't have to view this harmful imagery, and I want to make sure that we do it in a way that is healing and supportive of the communities that have most been harmed. So I will be voting to cover them up as soon as possible, and I don't want children to ever have to see these things. I think the other thing is, people are saying that this is a learning tool. There's no reason why part of the recommendation was to take photographs of the murals, and there's no reason why kids can't continue to have these conversations with them as photographs and not be forced to view them without context, because without context, these types of art become dangerous and they become harmful. Just as Mammy dolls or Mammy salt shakers, they are in museums. Or Birth of a Nation is a film that is widely regarded as a classic, but it is also widely viewed as harmful and racist. So I think that's where we have to kind of put this mural, and we also have to recognize that it's in a school. And so I will be voting to move quickly to remove the mural from public view and also remove it permanently. Thank you.
Hand it down, yes. Hand it down. No cover up.
Right. So I do want to briefly just acknowledge Supervisor Matt Haney and Supervisor Shaman Walden, school board alumni. And so we have a motion. Commissioner Lopez.
So I've been listening to the arguments for months, like I mentioned before, and in the articles that are sharing the narrative of what we've been talking about for years now, Every single one puts traumatizes, in quotes, traumatizes children. And I want to point that out because the people who keep pushing to keep them up in no way can call out the trauma that other people are facing. And we keep using art and history as this argument, but it's only when it's convenient. Where's the fight for the murals in the Mission when they're being threatened to take down? And that also shares a history of a people that we need to be seeing more of. It's only when it's an attack on white supremacy values. So I will be voting to take it down, and I appreciate Commissioner Sanchez's fearlessness in bringing this to the board. The fact that there's a majority to keep this is no argument. We would still have slavery, and women would still not have the right to vote if we went with the majority.
Ms. Hulk, can you speak to what the implications would be for painting over the mural?
So, as usual, I'm going to avoid giving you legal advice in open session, but I do want to emphasize for the board the primary component that I think weighed into our analysis and why we came out with recommending panels. And I think the superintendent might want to weigh in on this as well, is that the option of painting over the mural will necessarily take much longer than the other options. And we understood part of the direction from the board and from the superintendent was to look for a more expeditious resolution so that our children were not continuing to walk past these murals and view them every day. So we can certainly undertake the effort to do more analysis around painting over the mural, but it will take longer. And as you heard Chief Kalanathan just tell you, it will likely take a year or more.
So, excuse me. So you're saying that we can vote on the recommendation now and it will cover it up sooner, or we can do an analysis to paint it over, and that analysis will take a year?
That's exactly right. What we're saying is if you accept staff's recommendation tonight, we fully expect that we can implement that recommendation much sooner and within the year. If you vote to paint or have us do more analysis and a full-blown EIR to paint over the mural, that will take you at least, and in all candor, it's going to take more than a year. So that is something staff can do, but we understood part of your directive to us was to find an expeditious resolution.
Okay, and can we also just speak to what the cost implications would be for painting over the mural? Because right now, the recommendation, I think the most expensive one was $845,000. The one before us, I think, is about $600,000. So what would, if we were looking at painting over the mural, what does that do?
Yeah, Commissioner, if I could, it's a good question, and the painting cost that I presented in the slide actually said 600,000 plus as an indicator, because as Commissioner as Commissioner Collins pointed out, most of the cost is not associated with the painting per se, but with the environmental review report, which is actually both its production, the analysis, is costly and time intensive. And so I'd actually have to look through my notes to break out the two different costs. But again, in my experience, I've had a number of EIRs that came in at $500,000 and more to prepare and move through the process. For the solid panels option, there's actually a range of $645,000 to $825,000, and that range is there to reflect the wide variety of materials that we could pursue for the panels, right? So there's a lot of different types of materials and approaches to using and installing those panels. So we wanted to reflect that range. And included in that cost is also an estimate for completing a mitigated negative declaration, which is a different type of environmental analysis that takes much less time than than an EIR in general, and I think would be sufficient, based on my preliminary review, an appropriate kind of environmental analysis for this level of intervention.
Okay, and where does the money come from?
Commissioner, that is an excellent second question. The funding source has not, our funding sources are pretty constant, right, in terms of how facilities work is funded in the district. That decision does not need to be made tonight, but the choices are pretty standard. Again, you have our deferred maintenance program, right? So the same funding sources that fund our facilities design and construction work, which are kind of our smaller scale deferred maintenance. The same shop that it was going to do the Star King paving would their funding sources. There's also the general obligation bond program. And then lastly, general fund. And so those are kind of our three biggest more stable funding sources that would be available for this kind of work, but how we would reallocate those funds and in what combination has not been determined at this time.
Okay, if we were to move forward with painting it over, it would take longer, it would cost more, and there's not an identified source to cover something that's already going to be incredibly expensive. I mean, that's a leading question, but
It's a pretty good summary of our analysis.
yeah. So I think the emotional push and a very justified push to permanently cover the murals is understandable. And as when I think about my role as a public official and trying to do what's right and manage the public's dollars effectively and do what I believe is going to work best for our young people. That's what's sort of pulling me in this other direction of not trying to do something that's going to produce an unnecessary price tag when the objective of covering the mural will be accomplished with the recommendation that we have in front of staff. And so that's where I'm at right now. Commissioner Collins.
Okay.
And then Commissioner Sanchez.
Okay, so I had one question is, can we undergo this process of exploring both options at the same time? Because I do want, one of my priorities is making sure that children don't have to view it sooner rather than later, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, we couldn't, I'm wondering what would be would we be able to do an analysis of both?
Let me think about that for a minute and let legal counsel if they want to take a first shot.
Yeah, I think actually we're probably getting into the area that I want to advise you on that in closed session, because what we'd really want to do is a little more deeper analysis on the legal risks and benefits around the painting option. If that's something that the board directs us to do, we would want to provide that advice. And then we could, obviously, if the board wanted to take a different direction, we would bring that back for action in open session. So we could do that analysis, but that's not a decision you have to make tonight.
Thanks. And then my other question was what I'm hearing is both that students and families don't want to see the objectionable content in the murals, but I'm also hearing that for Native American families with a history of trauma in our public spaces and in the way that they're portrayed in our history books, which I can attest to, there's just really, it's not even erasure. We are miseducating children right now, currently in SFUSD, about Native American history. And so it's not just about removing them from public view, it's also about kind of righting a wrong. And that I'm hearing that the community feels a need to right that wrong, and also in terms of white supremacy culture, which I didn't call anybody anything, I'm naming a dynamic that we're kind of experiencing right now, which is that when Black and brown folks assert themselves and say what they want or what they need, that they are, if it conflicts with the dominant culture, which is white supremacy culture, that they're basically just denied or overlooked. And so if we want to show how we're living our values, what we need to do is listen to people that have been harmed. And so, like for Black families that say, I want Black history celebrated in my school, then that's what we need to do. And for Native American, this is not just, and I want to say to the media, you know, when you use the word activist to describe parents that are here, you're participating as well in marginalizing their voices. And that there are parents that are members of the Native American PAC that for years have been talking about this. They're leaders, they've had meetings. This isn't just some random like decision to, you know, start a ruckus or something. And so, you know, because of that, I think it's, that, you know, if we want to live our values, we should listen to folks when they say what they need.
Can you just once again give us the cost range for both the paneling over and painting over of the mural?
The solid panels had a range of $645,000 to $825,000, so it had an endpoint on it. Whereas for the environmental impact report and the painting, there was kind of an entry price threshold of $600,000, but also that it could be far in excess of that.
All right, so that's what we're dealing with. Essentially, at face value right now, they're about the same. We know that painting over could entail further costs, but they're both expensive. And we've been hearing that it's not an undue term to use right now, that this is reparations. That basically, if we can do our small part after offending not just one culture, but many cultures for 70 years with this mural or set of murals, it's about time that we stood up and paid for it. And this is one way we can do it. So the cost factor to me, although it's always an issue, is not insurmountable, and we should do it because it's the right thing to do.
Dr. Matthews?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear because of your last comments. So the amendment actually says it looks at not actually the cost, but more of the unduly, if it's the time element. And I just want to say, because I haven't had the opportunity to weigh in. As many of you know, I was a student here. Went to McIntyre High, and we actually came down and we played Washington in games, and then we'd head back up to McIntyre after we won. Actually, that's not accurate. Washington always killed us. But I didn't have the opportunity to go into the hallways at Washington until earlier this school year, and I had the opportunity to see the murals. And Oprah Winfrey describes racism as the everyday wearing down of the soul. When I walked in and saw those murals, it wasn't even the wearing down. It was like a chunk of my soul was pulled out. But I will say my first response was to paint them over, as many people in this group have said. That was my first response. As you just heard from our chief facilities officer, what I thought about when I stood there at the moment when I looked up was what was happening to me, but then I also thought about the tens of thousands of students who walked by those murals every day over and over and over again. And for me, what's critically important is removing them from sight. I understand there are different viewpoints here, but I don't want another student who doesn't have to see those murals to have to see them. And so the recommendation that came to you was much more around removing them as quickly as possible. It was much more around time. And as your amendment talks about the an unduly amount of time, then move to the first one. And I just want to, but your second piece that you just said actually talked about money. And so I just wanted to be clear, if the amendment is about an unduly amount of time, and we're going to look, if that's what passes and we look at that, I can just tell you that that will most likely come back a lot sooner. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, after rereading the amendment, it does allow for both options. Let's see. Painting over the mural, or if in the judgment of staff, painting over the mural will result in undue delay. Staff shall develop a project that removes the mural from public view using solid panels or equivalent material. So I can't support that. Any other comments or questions?
I have a question. So the amendment that's standing now is one related to time and panels first, and then or painting first, and unless it takes undue amount of time. And I guess I want to know what you consider undue amount of time.
I think,
Because it sounded like you moved to just.
I think if painting it over is going to take 3 years, if that's what staff analysis is going to be, and I don't know where it's going to go, then that would be undue amount of time.
Okay.
But this way we get one result,
No matter what.
Yeah.
But we're pursuing one option, knowing that maybe we'll have to do another, but either way, one of those will pass.
Exactly.
Okay.
Commissioner Lamb.
I just want to express, if I didn't earlier in my short remarks, is that I want to be able to have these murals out of sight as quickly as possible. Similarly, I just don't want young people having to face and see those murals. I saw them in person, and similar reactions as my colleagues. I also have a daughter in high school. She practices actually at WASH regularly there, and I just do not want those murals visible to our students and the broader school community.
Yeah, I'll just say before we call a vote that similar to last week, I appreciate all of the comments and the passion around this issue. And you know, when I was coming up in San Francisco, I lived in public housing. I grew up on food stamps. I went to schools in the city where we had educators that told me about a future that was possible. And the schools that these teachers house are transforming lives. What we see happening over and over again is the outcomes of our district along racial lines aren't changing. I ran for school board to change that. And all the media attention, all the public outcry over this particular matter, you know, this is democracy. We're free to say whatever we want. But I'm happy to be voting on this tonight so we can get back to the business of transforming lives the way that mine was when I was coming up in the city. After last week, after we heard this issue, you know, everybody left and people have to go. I understand. But we heard our Safe and Supportive Schools Resolution Update, which was authored by now Supervisor Haney, which showed continued growth in chronic absenteeism, which we want to see minimized. It also showed suspensions going up at our middle school level, which is problematic. And if any of you on either side are willing to also continue to engage with us around those issues, I would greatly welcome it. Ms. Casco, roll call vote.
Clarification, Mr. Chairman, we are voting on Mr. Sanchez's amendment, correct?
Yes.
That's been duly moved and seconded. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Lamb?
Yes.
Ms. Lopez?
Yes.
Mr. Moliga?
Yes.
Ms. Norton, Mr. Sanchez?
Yes.
And Mr. Cook?
Yes.
That's 6 ayes.
Thank you.